Welcome to Face the State. I'm Ariana Bennett. Thank you for joining us. Well, it's an exciting time to be living in Reno with a new development proposal seemingly popping up on a weekly basis. But how do we keep the balance between growth and livability for our lower income residents? Reno City Manager Andrew Klinger is here now to talk about that. Andrew, thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Okay, so the City Council just approved the new strategic plan. How are you guys feeling about it?
Oh, I feel great about it. So we've done this after probably about a year's worth of work, including outreach to the citizens. You know, we had almost 6,000 citizens engage with us, either through online surveys or focus groups and other things. And there were, definitely some themes that popped out of that. Reno, people wanted to see Reno as a place for outdoor recreation, arts and culture, university town, and high tech. And those are the things that when you look at the vision statement that the Reno City Council came up with, those are all captured within it.
But a lot of it has to do with managing this huge expansion we're seeing. It does seem like all the time new people are coming in wanting to move their businesses here or create these huge new developments, housing and new commercial spaces. And I know managing that is one of the main priorities.
It is, and so we came up with 5 priorities. Thriving downtown and University District was number 1. In all the surveys and everything that we've done, I mean, people are really focused on downtown. But well-managed growth, and how do we manage the growth is one of the other priorities that council came up with. There are not a lot of new projects. We have the student housing project downtown, and looking at that. We're talking now, we're having a workshop coming up, we don't have a date yet, but looking at housing, from the very low income to the upper ends of housing to make sure we take care of, all of our citizens.
Right, I think, one of the big things that we're gonna see as a lot of developers come in and they wanna buy up some of these older, more blighted properties, it's a good thing, especially for downtown Reno, to see things get cleaned up a little bit, but there are residents in these buildings, the motels, there's a homeless population down there. Shelters are full. What do you do with that population when you put in a nice new development?
Well, you have to look at developing strategies for housing that, again, can be for the very low income to all the way up to the upper end. And we just recently approved, for example, 387 affordable housing units. And that takes care of one segment of the population, but you also have the very low income, or those that really are on the verge of homelessness, and that's another area. And we actually have, like I said, a workshop coming up where we're going to look at what are some of the different alternatives that we can do as a city to make sure that we have that housing, because obviously we want to see downtown prosper and grow, but as it does, you do have a population that's in downtown currently that is in that very low income range.
Right. Homelessness or near homelessness, it's a complicated issue. There are a lot of different angles. I know the city has been working with City of Sparks and Washoe County to kind of address this. You guys had a joint meeting recently. What came out of that?
We did have a joint meeting recently, and one of the things that came out of that was increasing the funding for our Community Assistance Center. I mean, one of the things that we desperately need in this region is what we call a permanent overflow shelter. It's a secondary shelter, and so that's really our top priority now in the short term, is finding that additional space for the overflow shelter and adding the funding really for the services, because it's one thing to just create the shelter, but if you don't put in the services that go with it, then you're not going to be successful.
Is there a plan in the works to consolidate resources between the 3 entities?
Well, the 3 entities right now really are consolidating resources when it comes to homelessness. So we have the Community Assistance Center. The county really provides the social service aspect of it, but all 3 jurisdictions contribute to that Community Assistance Center. And part of what we did recently was increase those commitments from each one of the jurisdictions.
How far are we from the point where we need to get in terms of getting everyone or as many people as possible into a stable housing or living situation, getting treatment? I mean, are we years and years away?
Well, we're not unique in facing these sort of challenges. I mean, I think communities all over the country face these challenges, and we always say, look, you're never going to solve homelessness. it's one of those things that how can we make sure that we manage it better, that we provide the resources, and really it's the housing that is one of the most important components, is the housing, probably followed by the services that go with it, whether it's mental health counseling, whether it's substance abuse counseling. Those things are all really, really important.
Where do you get the funding for that?
Well, right now it's coming from the three jurisdictions. I mean, we all have to recognize that it's, you know, it's something that's important to our region, that if we want to have a thriving downtown, if we want to continue to attract these high-tech companies to this area, that it's something that all three jurisdictions have to be committed to and have to provide funding for. Is
there the funding for that elsewhere in the budgets, or is this going to be involving a new source of revenue?
Well, for us right now, we're using some federal grants that we receive. I believe the other jurisdictions are as well. But even what we're providing now is still not enough. I mean, we could provide so much more. It's always limited resources when you're dealing with budgets. And you know, we've talked about a permanent, long-term funding source, such as a dedicated you know, component of either sales tax or property tax. But I think, you know, given that we're just coming out of the recession and you've got, you know, other entities looking at increasing taxes, it's probably not something we can do right now. But in the long term, it's something we really need to look at as a region.
Now, you mentioned in part of your budget presentation for the upcoming fiscal year that property taxes, they have a cap right now, and that's been a limiting issue for you.
It's been a very limiting issue. So I think most people are familiar with, you know, the 3 or the 8% cap, depending on if you're residential or commercial. But the way that that's calculated is actually it's a 0.2% cap for the upcoming fiscal year. And so when you look at the city of Reno, for example, the difference between 0.2, what the cap's going to be next year, and what people a lot of times think it is of 3%, that's $1.5 million. So $1.5 million that we will not get for, you know, whether it's public safety, whether it's for homeless services, those sorts of things. So it's really having a negative impact on our ability to provide the essential services.
So what would you like to see change?
Well, I think what we need to do is we need to go to the next legislative session and we need to make some reforms to that, look at that tax cap, maybe take away what they call the alternative cap calculation, which is how we get to the 0.2%, and go to maybe just a cap of 3 and 8%. That would help us tremendously.
Nevada has traditionally been a state that doesn't love taxes. How do you justify a move like this to the voters?
Well, I mean, I think the justification is that, you know, one of the things that we really want to make sure is that we have, you know, the public safety services that people expect, whether it's police, whether it's fire. We have the park amenities that people expect, and you know, and honestly, we're not providing the level of service that we should be providing. And I think there should be a cap on the property taxes. I just think the current structure, when it limits you to 0.2% growth, is just not realistic. I mean, inflation is higher than 0.2%. So with the growth and other things that are happening, you know, it makes it hard for us even just to keep up with the growth.
Right. Now there is some allocated money for blight mitigation and also a new city position for someone to kind of oversee this money. Just tell me a little bit about that.
So last year with the surplus funds, we allocated $1 million of that to this blight mitigation program. And so we're looking at, you know, several things, from tearing down buildings to graffiti kits to providing education on graffiti, our motel inspection program as well. So many different aspects to this blight mitigation program. And then we also hired a revitalization manager who's going to oversee those blight mitigation funds, as well as help us implement and manage our downtown action plan. So we're going out, you know, bringing a consultant in. He's going to look at all the downtown aspects, from homelessness, weekly motels, blight, and make some very specific recommendations to us on how we begin to fix those things.
Okay, well, we only have a couple minutes left, but I do want to touch on a few more things. How is the city's debt looking right now?
We're in a much better position. We're at about you know, $500 million, which is still a lot of money, but it's better than the $600+ million that we were a few years ago. So you know, we've done a good job to refinance things where we can, pay off debt where we could, and so I think we're in a much better position than we were several years ago.
Okay. And on a positive note, last year was the first year in a very long time the city had a surplus. Do you anticipate, big growth in the future? More surpluses coming your way?
I don't, and I think a big part of that is the property tax cap that's really restricting that revenue growth. So we're really looking at a flat budget for the next year.
Okay. What message do you have for the public about what the picture is for Reno moving forward? What do they need to know?
Well, I mean, I think they need to know that they have a mayor and council that's, very dedicated on, focusing on these important issues and making sure that, the downtown is a high priority and making downtown a place that both residents, visitors, and students, we want to be a university town, want to come to.
Okay. And of course, there are resources on the City of Reno's website in case they want to look up the full strategic plan and some budget information. I know personally that's on there. I looked at that myself. It's reno.gov, right?
Yep, reno.gov.
Okay, Andrew, thank you
All
so
right,
much for your time. I sure appreciate it.
Yep.
Well, coming up on Face the State, meet the man who plans to turn the old Park Lane Mall site into a new hub for millennials, how he plans to do it, and why he chose right now, right after the break.